York City. A rainy evening, the rain had been falling since dusk, a steady whisper against the windows of the Beaumont, one of Manhattan's most elegant restaurants. Inside the world was all soft jazz candlelight and quiet laughter, the kind of place where time moved slowly and the air smelled faintly of roses and money. At the door stood Aaliyah Carter, her umbrella dripping her breath, trembling as she whispered to the small boy in her arms. "Be good for Mommy, okay, Oliver?" 2 years old clutched his stuffed rabbit, his big brown eyes blinking at the chandeliers above them. He didn't know this world of crystal glasses and silk tablecloths. Neither did she. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Her best friend Mia had set her up on a casual dinner with a man she swore was kind, down to earth, and not the usual New York jerk. What Mia forgot to mention was that the man's name, Michael Blake, was printed on the financial magazines, stacked in every corporate lobby in Manhattan. Aaliyah almost turned back when she saw him. He was seated near the window, tall, composed in a charcoal gray suit that seemed tailored to perfection. His hair caught the amber light, his expression unreadable. Oh God, Mia didn't say he was him. Her shoes were still damp when she crossed the marble floor. Oliver squirmed in her arms, murmuring softly. "Excuse me, Mr. Blake," she began, her voice unsure. He looked up, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. There was something old in his eyes, not age, but weight, the kind of sadness that had learned to wear silence like armor. "Ms. Carter," he said, rising politely, "please sit." She nodded quickly, sliding into her chair, settling Oliver into the high seat the waiter brought over. The music faded into the background as she tried to steady her hands. She'd worn her only nice dress pressed twice to hide its age. She wanted to look like someone who belonged, but the tremor in her fingers gave her away. Oliver reached for his cup of water. "Careful, baby." Too late. The glass tipped, spilling cold water across the white linen, splashing Michael's sleeve. Aaliyah gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. So sorry. I should never have brought him. This is..." But before she could finish, Michael moved. Slowly, calmly, as though none of it mattered. He picked up a napkin, dabbed his arm, then crouched down beside Oliver. "Hey, buddy," he said gently, smiling for the first time. "No harm done." Oliver blinked, uncertain, then reached out, tiny fingers touching the silk of Michael's tie. The billionaire laughed, low and warm, and something inside Aaliyah cracked open. The people at nearby tables stared. A CEO holding a toddler with milk on his sleeve wasn't a sight they saw every day. Yet Michael didn't seem to notice. He lifted Oliver into his arms, rocking him softly, until the child's whimpers quieted. And in that moment, under the hum of the rain and the hush of curiosity, Aaliyah saw something shift in Michael's eyes. Something fragile, like a window opening in a long-abandoned house. Because 3 years ago, on a night almost exactly like this, his fiancée had died in a car crash, 6 months pregnant. He hadn't stepped into a nursery since, hadn't held a child, hadn't even said the word baby without feeling the weight of grief sink into his chest. But now a little boy's hand was resting against his heart, and the ache was still there but softer. He looked up at Aaliyah. Her lips trembled with apology, but her eyes held a strength he hadn't seen in years. "Please don't be embarrassed," he said quietly. "I think he's just fine where he is." The candles flickered as if the rain outside had drawn a breath of relief. The waiter retreated. The room resumed its murmur. And Aaliyah, who had spent the last 2 years apologizing for existing, suddenly felt the strange, tender sense that maybe she didn't have to anymore. Michael didn't look away. In the gentle glow of light, he saw not a mistake or a burden, but a second chance he never believed he'd get. And for the first time in a long while, He smiled, truly smiled. Outside, the rain kept falling, tracing silver lines down the glass. Inside, something small but irrevocable began to grow between them, something that felt dangerously close to hope. If you've ever believed your story was over, remember this. Sometimes love doesn't return the way it left. Sometimes it walks back into your life in the smallest hands imaginable. 3 days had passed since that rainy night at the Beaumont. Yet Aaliyah still caught herself replaying it. The candlelight, the spilled water, the way Michael Blake, the untouchable CEO, she'd only ever seen on screens, had held her child like he'd been doing it all his life. That afternoon, the sky over Central Park was brushed with sunlight, warm and golden, carrying the faint laughter of children and the rustle of leaves. Aaliyah had taken Oliver for a walk, hoping the fresh air might ease her restless thoughts. She hadn't expected to see him, but there he was, across the pond, sitting alone on a bench, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a cup of coffee balanced in one hand, a paperback open in the other. He looked so different from the man at the restaurant, not the CEO, with the perfect posture and sharp suit, but simply a man at ease, quietly existing. For a moment, she just watched him. Something in her chest twisted. Then, before she could decide what to do, Oliver saw him. Mike, he squealed, mispronouncing the name he'd heard only once. And before Aaliyah could react, the toddler was off his tiny shoes, pattering across the grass, his rabbit clutched tight. "Oliver, wait," she called, chasing after him. Michael looked up, startled, then smiled that same rare, gentle smile that had undone her days ago. He knelt just in time for Oliver to crash into his arms. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, laughing as the boy clung to his neck. "Well, this is a surprise." Aaliyah arrived breathless, cheeks flushed. "I'm so sorry, he just—" But Michael shook his head. "Don't apologize. I'm glad he remembers me." The words landed softly like sunlight through clouds. They sat on the bench together, watching Oliver chase pigeons and toddlers twice his size. The conversation began with small things. Work, the weather, her bakery job, but it flowed easier than either expected. And then came the moment. Oliver waddled back to them, arms raised, insisting to sit on Michael's lap. Michael lifted him easily, balancing the boy while still holding his coffee. "You've got quite the fan," Aaliyah said, half teasing, half admiring. Michael grinned. "I'll take the promotion." But before either could say more, Oliver suddenly froze, frowned, and let go. Michael blinked. A beat of silence, then realization. He looked down, and the front of his beige slacks was soaked. "Oh," he said deadpan. "Well, that's new." Aaliyah gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." He's never— A giggle escaped her before she could stop it, then another. Soon she was laughing uncontrollably. The sight of this powerful, immaculate man, billionaire investor, Forbes cover face, standing there with a toddler on his hip and a wet patch spreading across his pants. It was too much. Michael looked at her, mock offended. "You're laughing." I shouldn't be, but yes, I am." She managed between giggles. And then Michael did something unexpected. He laughed too. A full, unguarded laugh that startled even him. It had been years since he'd heard that sound come from his own chest. They ended up under a sycamore tree, Oliver now playing with blades of grass. The laughter faded into a comfortable quiet. "You know," Aaliyah said softly, watching him tickle her son's belly, "you look like a real dad right now." The words hung there, fragile, honest. Michael froze for a heartbeat. His hand stilled on Oliver's tiny shirt. Then with a quiet breath, he said, "Sometimes I wish I were." Aaliyah turned to look at him. The sunlight brushed against his face, catching the sadness in his eyes. The kind of sadness that had learned how to hide behind polite smiles and busy schedules. He didn't need to explain. She could feel the ghost of the life he'd lost, lingering in every careful gesture. For a while, neither spoke. They just watched Oliver chase after butterflies he could never catch. And somewhere between laughter and silence, between the scent of grass and the soft thud of little feet, Aaliyah realized that the man the world saw as distant and untouchable was in truth just a soul trying to remember how to feel human again. She smiled almost to herself. Perhaps she had found a way to remind him. The scent of cinnamon and buttercream usually calmed Aaliyah. But today, even the warm air of the small Brooklyn bakery felt heavy. She had come in early, hoping the rhythm of work rolling dough, glazing pastries, folding boxes, would quiet the thoughts circling her mind since that afternoon in Central Park. But peace never lasted long here. Did you see her? Marissa's voice cut through the hum of ovens, sharp and mocking. The single mom who thinks she's living in a fairy tale. Aaliyah froze mid-motion, her piping bag trembling in her hand. She didn't need to look up. She knew who they were talking about. Another girl behind the counter giggled. You mean the one who had dinner with that Michael Blake? Please. Marissa scoffed. You really think a man like that private jets Hampton's house the Blake Foundation would fall for a woman who can barely afford rent? He probably felt sorry for her. The words landed like stones. Aaliyah felt them sink into her chest one by one. Marissa leaned closer to the other girl, her tone cruelly sweet. You watch. He'll disappear soon. They always do. And when he does, she'll still be here baking cookies for minimum wage, pretending she wasn't just a charity project. Something inside Aaliyah cracked. She set down the piping bag, the frosting smearing across the counter like a wound. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from the ache of recognition. Because part of her, a small frightened part, wondered if Marissa was right. She turned slowly. You don't know him, Aaliyah said quietly. You don't know me. Marissa smirked. Oh, I know enough. And I know what this place looks like when someone starts reaching above her station. The manager stepped in, sensing the tension. Hey, enough. Let's not start drama during the morning rush. Aaliyah looked at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. You're not going to say anything about what she just said. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Just let it go, Aaliyah. We have customers. Let it go. She heard those words echo long after she left the bakery that evening, her apron folded neatly in her arms, her resignation barely a whisper. That night, the city outside her apartment pulsed with life sirens, laughter, subway rumbles. But inside, the small space felt unbearably quiet. Oliver was already asleep, his little hand resting on the stuffed rabbit he carried everywhere. Aaliyah sat beside him, knees drawn to her chest, watching the slow rise and fall of his breath. She thought of Michael, the way he had smiled at her in the park, the way he'd let Oliver ruin his expensive suit without a trace of annoyance. The way his laughter had sounded like something rediscovered, something almost holy. And yet the doubts pressed in like fog. What if Marissa was right? What if all of it, the dinner, the kindness, the warmth, was just pity? What if she was just a moment of charity in a man's lonely life? She closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. For years, she had built herself out of scraps, strength stitched from sleepless nights, dignity from the pieces of a broken dream. She had promised herself never to need anyone again. But now there was a man who looked at her like she was worth something, and that frightened her more than loneliness ever had. The room was dim, except for the flicker of the streetlight outside. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Oliver's forehead. "You deserve someone strong," she whispered, voice breaking. "Someone who never doubts herself." But in that moment, Aaliyah wasn't strong. She was just a woman, tired, hopeful, terrified of believing in love again. Outside, the city kept moving, uncaring and endless. Inside that tiny apartment, one heart wrestled quietly with the question. Every woman who's ever loved too carefully has asked herself, what if I'm not enough for the kind of love I've always dreamed of? The city was quiet that night, wrapped in the low hum of distant traffic and the soft sigh of rain against the windows. Aaliyah sat on the edge of her small couch, a cup of untouched tea cooling between her palms. The apartment was dim except for the orange glow of a street lamp bleeding through the blinds. Oliver slept in his crib nearby, his steady breathing the only sound that didn't ache. She hadn't heard from Michael since she quit the bakery. She hadn't expected to. After all, what could a man like him possibly want from a woman like her, a single mother who could barely keep the lights on? Maybe Marissa was right. Maybe kindness from men like Michael Blake always came with an expiration date. Then 3 soft knocks. Aaliyah froze. It was late, too late for neighbors. Her heart stuttered once, twice. She rose, tiptoed across the room, and opened the door. Michael stood there, rain clinging to his hair and the shoulders of his dark coat. No bouquet, no grand gesture, just him, real tired and impossibly sincere. "I heard you left the bakery," he said quietly. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the doorknob. "I didn't want to be a distraction." He stepped closer, not enough to intrude, but close enough for her to see the worry in his eyes. "You're not a distraction, Aaliyah. You never were." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand. People talk. They think I don't care what they think." He interrupted, voice soft but firm. "I only care that you walked away because of something that isn't true." The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things neither dared to say. Finally, Aaliyah whispered, "I don't want you to feel sorry for me." That was when he said it, simple, steady, like a promise he'd already made to himself. "If you're afraid, let me be the one who's afraid with you. Let me worry beside you, fail beside you, love beside you." The words struck deep, unraveling the wall she'd spent years building. Her eyes blurred. "You shouldn't say things like that, Michael. I don't know how to believe them." He exhaled slowly. "Then let me show you." Before she could answer, a small giggle broke the tension. Oliver had woken, standing in his crib, arms outstretched. "Baba," he called, his voice sleepy but joyful. Aaliyah gasped, half laughing through her tears. Michael blinked, startled, and then smiled, the kind of smile that softened every edge of his face. He stepped inside, knelt by the crib, and scooped the boy into his arms. Oliver squealed, tiny fingers curling into his coat. Michael held him close, one hand gently stroking the child's back. Aaliyah watched, tears spilling freely now. Something inside her shifted, the fear. The doubt, it didn't vanish, but it began to loosen. They sat together on the couch, side by side, the rhythm of Oliver's breathing filling the quiet. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Between them stretched a silence so tender, it felt sacred, a silence where grief met grace, and love, tentative but real, began to take its first breath. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. Inside, for the first time in a very long time, Aaliyah felt something close to peace. The scent of vanilla filled the air before Aaliyah even saw the sign. She stood on the sidewalk of a quiet Brooklyn street. Oliver's small hand wrapped in hers, gazing up at the storefront, bathed in morning light. The words painted across the glass door shimmered softly. Sweet Home, Artisan Bakery and Cafe. Her breath caught. The inside looked like something from a dream: light wood counters, soft cream curtains, a long glass display filled with empty trays, waiting for their first pastries. It smelled of new beginnings and fresh paint, and standing by the counter, sleeves rolled up, a mischievous grin on his face, was Michael Blake. Aaliyah blinked. Michael, what is this? He pretended to look around, feigning confusion. Looks like a bakery. A very good one, actually. I hear the owner's quite talented. She stared at him, lost for words. Owner. He handed her a small envelope. Inside, a single-page official, embossed her name written beside his. Co-owner. The letters blurred through her tears. Michael, this can't be real. Why? He shrugged lightly, his tone gentle but firm. Because, Aaliyah, you deserve to build something that's yours, not to spend your life clocking out of someone else's dream. She covered her mouth, the weight of those words sinking deep. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not as a favor, not as charity, but as faith. Michael continued, his voice low, steady. You built yourself from nothing. You raised a son, worked double shifts, never gave up. You've spent years taking care of everyone else. It's time someone made sure you could take care of what you love. Aaliyah shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I can't accept this. He smiled faintly. You already have. The lease is signed. The permits are done. All I need is your touch, your recipes, your laughter, your stubborn refusal to quit. She laughed through her tears, half in disbelief, half in awe. You're impossible. Only on weekdays, he replied, eyes softening. Oliver toddled forward, then bumping into Michael's legs, holding up a toy whisk Aaliyah had let him carry. Bake Baba, Michael chuckled, bending to ruffle the boy's curls. That's the plan, buddy. Aaliyah watched them, her son's small hand gripping Michael's, the two of them surrounded by the golden glow of morning, and something inside her steadied. She walked slowly around the shop, running her fingers along the new countertops, the shelves waiting to be filled. Every inch felt like a promise, the kind she never dared to make herself. When she turned back to Michael, he was leaning against the counter, watching her with quiet pride. Do you like it? He asked. She nodded, voice trembling. It's more than I ever imagined. Good, he said simply, because that's what you deserve. For a long moment, they just stood there, the single mother who had once baked through sleepless nights to survive, and the man who had once forgotten what it felt like to dream. The sun streamed through the front window, catching the word, Sweet Home, and scattering its reflection across the floor. Aaliyah smiled, touching the glass with her fingertips. It's perfect, she whispered. Behind her, Michael spoke softly, almost as if to himself. Home isn't a place. It's the people who make you believe you belong. She turned, meeting his gaze. There was no grand confession, no sweeping music, just two people quietly standing in the middle of something that had begun to look a lot like love. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, amid the scent of sugar and sunlight, a new chapter had already begun. The morning rush at Sweet Home had finally slowed. The smell of sugar and freshly baked bread lingered in the air, sunlight spilling through the windows onto small round tables. Aaliyah wiped her hands on her apron, a dusting of flour still clinging to her cheek. Across the shop, Michael was crouched beside Oliver, helping him stack wooden blocks into a tower that kept tilting dangerously. It was an ordinary day, until it wasn't. A silver-haired woman, one of their regulars, watched them with a kind smile. She had come every morning since the bakery opened, always ordering the same thing, a cup of chamomile tea and one almond croissant. Today, as she stood at the counter waiting for her change, she said softly, "You two make a beautiful family." Aaliyah froze, the words settling like a soft echo in the warm air. Michael turned from where he was kneeling, eyes lifting toward the woman. He didn't correct her. He didn't laugh it off. He simply looked at Aaliyah, and something shifted in his face. The next few moments felt suspended, as if the world had slowed just enough for him to make a choice he'd been holding inside for months. He stood, brushed the flour from his trousers, and walked toward her. Oliver, sensing something, followed, toddling close behind. Michael stopped in front of Aaliyah, his expression steady, but his voice trembling slightly, the way a man's voice does when his heart outruns his words. "Aaliyah," he said quietly, "you were about to explain, weren't you? Let me do it for you." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket. The bakery fell silent. Even the soft hum of the espresso machine seemed to fade. And then he went down on one knee, right there on the tiled floor next to a display case full of eclairs and cupcakes with crumbs scattered around their shoes. Gasps fluttered through the room. Mia peeked from the kitchen door, her hands flying to her mouth. Michael took a small velvet box from his coat. His hand shook slightly, but his eyes never left Aaliyah's. "I can't promise life will be easy," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise your cakes won't burn, or that Oliver won't pee on me again, though I'm really hoping he won't." Laughter rippled through the shop, breaking the tension, and Aaliyah's tears spilled freely now. But Michael continued, his voice softening. "I can promise this. I'll stay. Through the mess, the noise, the tired mornings, the endless dishes, through every single day that looks nothing like perfection, but everything like home." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring that caught the light just enough to shimmer warm and unpretentious, like everything about her. Aaliyah's breath caught. "Michael," he smiled, "I'm asking you to let me love both of you for all the days we're given. Will you marry me?" For a moment she couldn't speak. The room blurred. The customers had stopped mid-sip, watching with soft eyes. Oliver tugged on her apron, looking up with the innocence only a child could have. "Mommy happy?" he asked. Aaliyah let out a laugh that broke into a sob. She knelt down, took Michael's face in her hands, and whispered, "Yes, baby, Mommy's happy." Then, through tears and trembling hands, she said the word that had been waiting to be born from every silence, every doubt, every lonely night that came before him. "Yes." The bakery erupted in applause. Mia cried into a dish towel. The elderly woman clapped softly, whispering, "About time." Michael slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He stood pulling her into his arms as Oliver squealed and wrapped his tiny arms around both of them. Flower dust floated in the air like confetti. Outside, the city moved on. But inside Sweet Home, amid the smell of sugar and sunlight, 3 lives quietly became one. Years passed quietly, measured, not by calendar pages, but by laughter, by the rhythm of the oven timer, by the soft hum of a life built from second chances. Sweet Home had grown into something far beyond a bakery. It became a place where stories rose like bread, slowly, warmly, with care. The neighborhood children called it the Happy Shop, and no one ever left empty-handed. Every Thursday afternoon, Aaliyah opened the doors for her favorite part of the week, cookies of courage. 10, sometimes 15 little faces pressed against the counter, eyes wide with wonder. Most of them were from the nearby shelter children who knew too much about hunger and not enough about safety. Today, Aaliyah would say, tying her yellow apron, "We're making chocolate chip bravery." The children always laughed, even though they'd heard the line 100 times. She taught them how to measure, how to stir gently, how to wait for sweetness to rise. And as flour dusted their hands, she told them stories about patience and hope, while Aaliyah taught Michael handled the numbers, the logistics, the things she used to fear. He was no longer the CEO who lived in boardrooms. He was the man fixing leaky faucets, balancing the books, greeting every customer by name. On Fridays, he hosted budget and biscotti workshops for single mothers learning to manage new jobs. He'd sit with them, sleeves rolled up, a pen behind his ear, helping them map their dreams onto real pages. The bakery had become a small miracle in the middle of Brooklyn, a haven for those who had nowhere else to belong. Sometimes after closing time, Aaliyah would find Michael sitting by the front window, the city lights reflecting off the glass sign that read, "Sweet Home." He'd have Oliver beside him now, older, his head resting against Michael's arm. They'd be laughing about something small, a frosting mishap, a crooked cake, a silly customer story, and Aaliyah would stop in the doorway, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. Their life wasn't perfect. The oven broke more than once. Rain leaked through the roof one winter. They disagreed sometimes sharply about recipes and renovation costs. But in every argument, every tired night, there was always a hand reaching for the other. Michael still carried a scar inside him, the loss he once thought he'd never heal from. Yet whenever he saw Aaliyah wiping flour from her cheek, or Oliver racing through the shop with a spatula like a sword, the ache softened. What grief had hollowed out, love had gently filled. To outsiders, they were just a family running a small bakery. But to those who stepped inside, they were something more, a reminder that love didn't need grand gestures or perfect timing to change everything. On one quiet evening, as the last batch of cookies cooled, Aaliyah looked across the counter. Michael was sweeping the floor, humming tunelessly. Oliver sat on a stool decorating a cupcake with far too many sprinkles. Aaliyah smiled, whispering almost to herself, "We made it." Michael glanced up. "What's that? Nothing," she said, her voice warm and full. "Just sweet home." He set down the broom, crossed to her, and took her hand, his thumb tracing the flour still on her skin. And in that small, unremarkable moment, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint clink of dishes, the smell of vanilla in the air. The life they had built shone quietly, beautifully, exactly as it was meant to. It was a quiet autumn afternoon in Brooklyn. The golden light filtered through the bakery windows, catching motes of flour floating in the air like tiny fireflies. Outside, leaves drifted down the sidewalk in lazy spirals. Inside, Sweet Home glowed with the same familiar warmth, vanilla, cinnamon, and laughter. Michael was standing behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, trying to fix a stubborn coffee grinder that had decided to quit mid-morning. Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with amusement. He looked up, feigning exasperation. "You know," he said, "I've fallen a lot in my life, off bikes, out of trees, downstairs. But the best fall I ever had?" He paused, his lips curving into a teasing smile. "Was falling for you." Aaliyah groaned, half laughing, half embarrassed. "Michael Blake, that line is so bad it should come with a warning label." Maybe, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "But you're still smiling." She rolled her eyes and pointed toward the wall above the front counter, where a small wooden sign hung, hand-carved and slightly crooked from years of sunlight. The words etched into it had faded a little, but they were still clear enough to read. "Sometimes love doesn't knock. It walks in with a diaper bag." Michael turned, following her gaze. The sign had been his wedding gift to her, a joke at first, now a relic of the story that had built their world. He smiled softly. You still like that thing, I love it. Aaliyah said, her voice gentler now. It reminds me that love doesn't always arrive when we're ready for it. Sometimes it just shows up. Messy, unexpected, carrying a crying baby and a chance you never saw coming. At that moment, Oliver came running out from the back, holding a piece of paper smudged with crayons. "Look, Mommy, Daddy," he shouted, waving it in the air. He thrust it into Aaliyah's hands, a drawing of 3 stick figures under a crooked orange sun. "That's you," he said, proudly pointing. "And that's Daddy. And me." Michael knelt beside him, laughing softly. "You forgot the bakery champ." Oliver shook his head seriously. "No, we're in the bakery." Aaliyah knelt too, pulling the boy into her arms. Michael joined them, his hand resting gently on Aaliyah's back. They stayed there for a while, 3 people huddled together on a flour-dusted floor, surrounded by the scent of sugar coffee and home. Outside, the light began to fade. The sunset poured through the windows in shades of amber and rose, washing everything in warmth. Aaliyah looked up at Michael, her eyes shimmering. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I didn't deserve love, that it was something meant for other people. People who hadn't made mistakes, who hadn't been left behind." Michael brushed a thumb along her cheek. "And now?" She smiled faintly, tears, bright but calm. "Now I know love didn't come to save me," she said. "It came to teach me how to believe again." He pressed his forehead to hers. Then it did exactly what it was supposed to. The bakery clock ticked quietly. Outside, a car honked in the distance. Inside, Sam felt suspended, caught between the smell of vanilla, the warmth of their laughter, and the soft heartbeat of something eternal. Oliver, still cradled between them, yawned. "Mommy, Daddy, we home." Aaliyah kissed his hair. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "We're home." And as the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the city skyline, the sign above the counter gleamed faintly in the fading light, its words glowing like a benediction. If you've ever believed that love passed you by, remember this: sometimes it isn't gone. It's just waiting for the right moment to walk in. Maybe not with roses or grand promises, but perhaps with a diaper bag, a shy smile, and the courage to stay.